So yeah, I think you're probably going, Natalie, I've had enough of you. I'd like to listen to Sharon from BASF talking about permanent baiting and long-term baiting. So Sharon, if you could show yourself, I think you're off of mute. If you can put your camera on, that would be amazing. There we go, fabulous. Can I hear you? Let me check your audio.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Absolutely.
There we go. Right.
Great.
Then.
I'll say goodbye for now. And yeah, please carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Screen up for everybody. Everything okay?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. Do I need to drop that one? So, okay. Right then. There we go. Right then. So thank you, everybody. A bit like Natalie, I've been in the business for over 30 years, and I must admit, I absolutely love it. Started at the R&D side of it in the laboratory, and now in technical marketing. And love being involved, love going out in the field, doing field trials, love working with pest controllers. I've been fortunate to go global, training, learning, and I must admit, I don't ever regret for 1 minute choosing pest control and rodenticides and rodenticides is my kind of field. Don't regret it for a minute. Yeah, and like I say, look forward to it being, like I say, more women. But I think excellent industry for anyone to get involved in. So righty-ho. So permanent baiting and long-term baiting. So let's get going. So the contents, if I just briefly go through what I'll be covering, obviously permanent baiting, we've got a definition, and then just the logistics of how, where, who, when, why, how, that we can actually use permanent baiting, which products can be used for permanent baiting, and then exactly the same thing for long-term baiting, the definition, so the where it can be used, how, when, exactly same as before, which products, and then ending with just a summary comparison slide, just the yeses and nos and the do's and don'ts for each of those different types of baiting regimes. So if we start off with permanent baiting, we have the crew guidance. So we have a number of documents that we should be looking at before we even think about permanent baiting. So obviously there's the specific one, the crew guidance on permanent baiting, which was revised in 2019. And then also encompassing everything, including permanent baiting, we've got the crew code of best practice. So both of those, I mean, and it will refer to on the label, follow the crew guidance. So you must be aware of them. Obviously, you must have read them and understood them to follow them. And then also the BPCA, they have their own document to help you. If you go on their website, can you permanent bait with rodenticides? So there are a number of documents out there that should be read and digested before tackling permanent baiting. So that's our little bit of background. So what do we mean by permanent baiting? So it's when there's actually no rodents present, and we're going to put the bait down because this is a high likelihood site of either an infestation or a reinfestation. Now, rodenticide baits were never initially developed for this purpose. They were developed to control infestations. So this is kind of not a new use, but a newly recognized use in a way, in the fact that we're actually putting them down when there's nothing there, but it's to guard against it. So the key thing is there's actually no rodents present. But it could be that, like I say, it's a high-risk site, or you keep clearing up the rodent infestation and then it comes back, and you clear it up and it comes back. So for reasons that's beyond your control. So it could be that it's a neighbouring site that's got, for example, rat infestation, and you can't access that and you can't get anything done about it for one reason or another. So they're going to constantly invade your site. So it could be that could be an issue. Another one is quite often is kind of railway embankments, ongoing and forever source of rats on a railway embankment. If you've got a site right next to that, or another one is obviously waste dumps, etc. It could be incoming goods. Obviously, if you've got a site, maybe food site or animal feed site, where numerous lorries are coming in from all over the kind of Europe or wherever, and they may or may not have rodents present on them. And so that's a high risk. It's beyond your control. And the aim of permanent baiting, the underlying aim, is to prevent infestations and protect the establishment from infestation. So prevent and protect. And we'll come on to a bit more indoors and outdoors later, but the bait is usually protected in tamper-resistant bait boxes, especially if it's outside baiting. So that's our kind of definition. Key thing is it's a prevent and protect the site from any infestation. So who can actually do permanent baiting? It's trained professionals only, so yourselves. And again, this is part of a risk mitigation. So as we say, rodenticides were never used for this. So if you're going to have rodenticides down permanently when there's actually no target species present, then we need to look at how do we mitigate the risk of having this bait down permanently and the risk to the environment and non-targets. And one of these risk mitigations is trained professionals only. So that's who can do it. And then the where we've mentioned in the previous slide, where there's a high risk of infestation or reinfestation. High risk sites are another one. So food manufacturing, hospitals. So sites where there's actually zero tolerance to any level of rodent presence. So zero tolerance sites. Permanent baiting can be done in and around buildings only. So no open areas, and obviously no sewers, because sewers have rats. So, and permanent baiting is for sites with nothing in them, no rodenticide infestations, but not in open areas. That's a key. So where it is allowed is in and around buildings only. So our definition of in and around is as far away from the building as you need to go to control the rodents that are invading the building. Now that's a European definition, which the HSE have still taken on. And I think that's a really, really pragmatic definition. So it's not limiting you to 20 meters or 10 meters. It's you're the professional. How far away do you need to go to control the rodents entering your building? And along with the where we're going to do it, it could be that it's only at strategic points. If you have a site, maybe not all your site is where you need to be permanent baiting. It could just be at certain points. And again, that's part of your risk mitigation. So maybe if you want to monitor, because you're a high risk site, maybe 80% of your site could be another form. It doesn't have to be permanent baiting with a rodenticide. Maybe you could use a trap or a monitoring bait, one that with no active ingredient in it. So does it have to be the whole site that is permanent baited? And I think particularly when you're looking at outside baiting, that's more of a thing that you need to look at and decide. And again, it's part of this cutting down the risk for the environment and on targets. Like I say, maybe it's just at strategic points. So that's something that you need to investigate. So why? Again, like I say, it's to protect and prevent our site from any infestation. And the permanent baiting, it can also obviously form a monitoring function. So if we have it down and we get a take, then we should be able to say, is it rats or mice? Where the takes actually occur on the site will give us an indication of where the risk is for the rodents entering. So we're going to know the species, we're going to know where they're entering, and to an extent, to a degree, sorry, the extent of the ingress for the rodents. I mean, if you've put 200 grams down, for example, of a difenicum bait, and you go a week later, and there's all 200 grams have gone from like 3 or 4 bait points, then you know you've just got the odd rat casually wandering onto your site. So it will give you an idea then of what you need to be doing. And the minute you see something, so the minute you with your bait takes and you've looked at where and why, then it's up to then. Now we're switching from permanent baiting, which is what you do when you have no rodent infestation, to adopting like the appropriate measures. So now you're looking at your IPM strategy, and now you're going back to a baiting strategy. And the key to that is obviously try and find cause the infestation, try and find the route that they're traveling on, and try and now prevent any further ingress into your site. So that's why. And now we look at how. So how are we actually going to implement this permanent baiting program? So obviously we're going to start with our environmental risk assessment. Like I say, the possible risks to non-targets, both primary, so if they the non-target eats the bait that wasn't meant for them, and secondary, so the bird that eats the rat, or the mouse, the fox that eats the rat. So we're doing our environmental risk assessment and our COSH assessment, which is the impact to human health, and also at the same time actually establishing, are we a high-risk site? So that's all part of your site survey and the background to your site. Non-chemical methods should always be our first option. So we've got IPM, proofing, hygiene. I mentioned briefly non-toxic monitoring. Can you use non-toxic monitoring in your whole site, or part of your site, or most of your site, as a means to cut down the amount of rodenticide bait that you're actually using for permanent baiting? Again, all the time looking at risk mitigation. Remote monitoring is another way of using non-rodenticide methods of seeing what's going on the site. And now that could be with or without bait. And then, but if you decide not to go with the non-chemical alternatives, then that has to be documented why. It could be that you didn't try them because you already knew they were impractical. List why that happens. But if you are actually going to, if you did try them, they didn't work, then that has to be documented as well. So this is all setting the scene now before we've even done anything with our, we've not even placed our permanent baiting yet. We've set the scene, we've done our assessments, we know we're a high-risk site, nothing else works, we've tried it all, and that's all part of the initial steps. So we're going with our bait, so we've found our site locations, again, keeping these to a minimum. I mean, this is a bait box outside the back door of a canteen, restaurant, cooking area, and not 20 yards away. It's the end of their property with kind of semi-wooded area. So this is, we started off with monitoring blocks and then went to bait but not straight away, but like a week later. It was a high risk. If you get no take from your rodenticide bait, continue, get no take. And it says for a series of consecutive no takes. And again, as the professional pest controller responsible for permanent baiting on this site, this is at your discretion of how many consecutive takes you think, well, actually, this area isn't a high risk anymore. Maybe something that's happened to your neighbor. Maybe they've actually controlled their infestation, and you can reevaluate now where on your site is high risk of reinvasion. If you've had it down and you've had consecutive no takes, maybe replace it with a monitoring bait, something blank, or a snap trap, or another means, or just maybe remove it. So again, this is all part of reducing as much as possible, not only how much rodenticide is down, but for the duration that it's down. So again, always keep reevaluating. And like I say, it's down to the pest controller in charge of the site to use his professional judgment as to what constitutes how many takes, means that that area of the site is no longer at risk from invasion, so we can cut back on the permanent baiting. So which products are authorized? So we're baiting, we've got our sites, we know what we're doing, we know this is the only option we've got. We've picked the exact spots on the site that we want to use. So which products? So only products containing bromadiolone, difenicum, and cholecalciferol have been authorized for use in permanent baiting. But watch out, not all bromadiolone and difenicum products are authorized. Both cholecalciferol, so Cilantro and Harmonix, they're both authorized. But for bromadiolone, it's some are and some aren't. And I'll just got a few examples in the next slide. So each product that is authorized for use, and it's the manufacturers that apply for this. So it's nothing to do with the formulation of the bait or anything like that. It's just what was applied for at the time. So these are examples of that I just pulled together. Again, it's nothing commercial. I just went on and had a look. So if we start with flucumaphen, so Storm and Storm Ultra, then no. For permanent baiting, no. And it doesn't matter if it's 25 parts per million or 50 parts per million. The answer's no, not for permanent baiting. Exactly the same story for brodifacoum. And again, I just pulled a list of baits that contain brodifacoum, and no for permanent baiting, whether it's 25 or 50. And that's because those two are single feeds. And so no, they can't be used. They're too potent, if you like, to be permanently placed in the environment. So bromadiolone, yes, but some. So I just quickly looked at a couple of labels, and this is just a yes, no. Again, this isn't any commercially driven thing. It's just to give you an idea of yes, no's. And there's no pattern in, you can say, oh, well, blocks are yes and grain is no, because it's not the case. And then again, I went to look at difenicum, and we've got Neocerexa block, yes, the gold, no. And then we've got some Robans, no. Robans, yes. Deadline, yes. So again, it's some. And Cilantro and Harmonix, yes. So you have to look at the label for each one. And the other thing to consider as well, particularly if you're baiting, permanent baiting outside, is do you want something that is securable? So that will strongly influence. So you've got your actives that you can use, and that will strongly influence the choice of the bait formulation that you use. Okay, so outdoors, do you want, need, and should have it, which will all come down to your environmental assessment and your cost assessment. Do you need it to be securable? So that's just to say that's nothing commercial, just to give you an idea of the different ones and what they say. So this is an example, and I just used Cilantro because it was kind of hours of the different of a bait label where permanent baiting is permitted. So I just went on and just said search permanent baiting, and there we are. 9 times on that permanent baiting is mentioned. So basically it's all over it. So there's no doubt that it tells you your bait points, it tells you everything. So there we know that can be used for permanent baiting. If you are allowed to permanent bait, on the label, there's got to be, and this has come from the regulators, certain phrases that then accompany being able to permanent bait on the label. So it's things we've covered already. So for example, permanent baiting is strictly limited to sites with a high potential of reinvasion and where other control methods have proved insufficient. So that's what we've said in one of our early slides. The next point, it's got to be part of an IPM strategy, and you've got to have done your risk assessment for the likelihood of reinvasion. The next thing is inspection. So the sites under permanent baiting should be inspected according to the label directions, so that they'll be different for each label. And then I'll come on to how frequent. I've got a couple of slides on the difference between indoor and outdoor permanent baiting. And basically the difference is the amount of visits that you're allowed. But yeah, so, and the visiting regime that's mentioned. And also, as I mentioned, for permanent baiting, follow the crew guidance. So going back to the very first slide, you had to have read, understood, digested and followed the crew guidance to permanent bait. Because like I say, it all comes back to this. This wasn't the original purpose. So it's something, this use is something that we need to protect and do to the best and never cause any kind of environmental damage because of it. If we now look at a bait label where permanent baiting isn't permitted, so for this I've used a storm secure one. Permanent baiting is mentioned once and basically don't do it. So the difference between the two labels is quite distinct. So under risk mitigation measures, if you're not allowed to permanent bait, and I know there's a lot of text now on the labels, and again, it's not the manufacturers, it's what the regulators say we have to put on. But if you look under risk mitigation, and if you can't use it, it will be the do not use. And permanent baiting will only be mentioned the once, and that's to say don't use it. So just as a summary for that, if permanent baiting is not permitted, that's all it says. Just mentions it once, don't do it. Okay, so it's quite distinctive on the label if you can or you can't use it. So obviously we've already said that any storm product is a no, but if you were looking at a bromadiolone or a difenycoon product and wanted to know, could you, then under risk mitigation, and that's the easiest way. What does it say under that? Okay. Permanent baiting indoors. So if we're permanent baiting indoors, so for example, a food storage warehouse, a high risk site, we've got a lower risk naturally, just because the environment, a lower risk to non-targets. We've got smaller bait points compared to rats. So bait points 5 to 10 times smaller. And we're going to do our frequency of visits according to your risk assessment, your site assessment. And the frequency of visits is entirely at the pest controller's discretion. It's your site, you've done all your assessments, you determine for indoors, and it's usually mice indoors, isn't it? How often you need to visit. I mean, you can get rats indoors, and where proofing and everything else has failed, then obviously you can permanent bait indoors for rats as well. But it's normally for mice, and it's for less bait, less non-target access. I mean, no vultures, etc., kites, red kites, whatever. So that's your you can determine your frequency. Permanent baiting outdoors, this is usually rats and not house mice. Now you're more likely now. Your non-target animals are humans. You're far more likely to come across your baits than an indoor baiting. So again, your risk assessment will be different, and it's much needed now. Alternative methods, obviously you have to say, just as we mentioned before, that you've tried them or you didn't try them because you knew they wouldn't work. And the non-chemical methods are considered not to be effective, and you have a high potential for an invasion and infestation. If you're permanent baiting outdoors, then visits should be no longer than 4 weeks apart. And you might need more frequent visits. It could be if you've got a higher risk of disturbance from non-targets or higher non-targets are present, then your 4 weeks might need to be 1 week. If we've got rodents detected, then we change then, and you need more frequent visits, because now you're not permanent baiting, you're actually treating an infestation. So now we switch to, always remember, permanent baiting is like our prevent and protect, but once you actually do have an infestation, then you're into a baiting regime. So the big difference between indoors and outdoors is obviously the risk to outdoors, and then your frequency of visits. Again, related to, you've got bigger bait point sizes, you've got your non-targets are more prevalent, and you're outside and you're outdoors. So non-targets, you've just mentioned them. So if you're in your bait, whether it's indoors or outdoors, you have evidence of small rodents entering your bait box, wood mice, field mice, voles, then you've got to remove the bait immediately. We're protecting wildlife, and obviously what we don't want, not only are these non-targets taking the rodenticide, but then the secondary toxicity implications if birds of prey, etc., then feed on these small rodents that have been into the bait box and eaten the bait. So the wood mice, voles, etc., they're not target species on the rodenticide label. So if you carry on with the bait down, then it's an unauthorized use of the product, and that means you are involved in an unauthorized use of the product. So it's protecting yourselves. So if you get these non-targets, then you must look at something else, an alternative method of control. Maybe remove the bait, put monitoring bait down, something that's non-toxic, so that if they do come and eat, and then just keep monitoring until maybe you get rats, and then you can do something, or just totally remove it, and then you're not encouraging them, and then reevaluate that then in maybe a month. Remove it, then you're not in any way. Okay, so it's protecting yourselves now by removing the bait as soon as you think you have. But part of your risk assessment before you're permanently baited was, am I in a site where I am likely to have wood mice, field mice, and voles migrating onto my site? And if in that the answer to that was yes, then you shouldn't have been using rodenticide bait. It should have been a non-toxic, some non-chemical form. So that's permanent baiting. Now long-term baiting. If we do this is less complicated if you like, but we'll do the same for long-term baiting. So rodent infestations, it says on the labels, are usually controlled within 35 days. If after 35 days, the infestation is still there, then now we're into long-term baiting. There could be a number of reasons why the infestation's there. It could be that the infestation was larger than expected. Maybe you didn't have enough bait points. Maybe there was a pocket of on the site that you didn't quite see, or you underestimated. A key one is neophobia. If they take 2 to 3 weeks to enter the bait boxes and eat the bait, then you're already 2 to 3 weeks into your 5-week schedule, baiting allowance schedule. It could be low bait acceptance, again, slowly before they overcome neophobia. You could have uncontrollable migration from a neighbouring rodent site. We've already mentioned like railway embankment, waste dumps, things like that you can't do anything about. And then last but obviously not least, you could have anticoagulant resistance. I mean, that's a possibility. All of those are and it could be a combination. It doesn't, that each of those doesn't have to be the one and only reason why you've not got control after 35 days. It could be any of those. So if we, again, just look at a storm secure label, and we can see if treatment after 35 days, then you can continue. Products should not be used after 35 days without an evaluation. So you go to your 35 days and you've got to say why the product's not working. you're the professional. What's happened or not happened? I mean, if it's neophobia, that makes this bait, the reasons for this bait not working. And you can carry on past the 35 days, but you have to say why it didn't work and what your actions are. So who can do it? Trained professionals only. Amateurs, on their label, it says, if after 35 days you've got no control, seek professional help. So again, because it's part of risk mitigation, again, long-term baiting is for trained professionals, yourselves only. And where it's any site or location where after 35 days, you've not had control. It can be in and around buildings, open areas, if open areas is permitted on the label, and sewers. And again, our in and around buildings is as far away as you need to place the bait to control the rodents invading the building. So in and around buildings, open areas. And if you remember from our permanent baiting, we just had in and around buildings, no open areas. So this is where we can do this. So how on the labels? So products should not be used beyond 35 days. When I showed you the label, do you remember it said this? Without an evaluation of the infestation, of the efficacy of treatment. If after 35 days, baits you need to continue to be consumed, the cause has to be determined. So 35 days and you're still getting bait take, why? And then again, you still have to look at other elements. You can't just say 35 days and on we trot with day 36. Look at why, like we said in the point above, but now you found out why, what you're going to do about it. Do you think it's resistance? Are you going to switch actives? Do you think it's neophobia? Is there something you can do about that? But whatever you do, when you carry on baiting, so our long-term baiting, which starts on day 36, it's still according to the label instructions. If your label says visit every 7 days, then you carry on extending the label instructions beyond the 35 days, visiting every 7 days. And that's just a kind of an example. And again, exactly as I said before, if in your long-term baiting, you think you've got small rodents entering your bait box or your covered and protected bait point, then yes, you must remove it and look at something else, another way of controlling the infestation. And then lastly, I just want to do a summary comparison slide. So if we look at permanent baiting, we have trained professionals. Long-term baiting, we have trained professionals with amateurs told to seek a trained professional if it's not worked after 35 days. Was the infestation present when you started? For permanent baiting, no. It's to protect and prevent the site from any infestation. For long-term baiting, yes. It's difficult to control infestation is what we've got. Your revisit frequency. For permanent indoors, it's at your discretion. PCO decision according to your risk assessments. If you're baiting outdoors, then it's at least every 4 weeks. For long-term baiting, it's according to the label. You carry on whatever your label instruction says. If they say it's every 4 days or every 7 days or frequently, then you carry on. Pest species is everything that's on the label. So in this country, it's black rats, brown rats, and house mice. Which baits are permitted? So diphenicum and bromadiolone baits, but not all. Remember, read our label, have a look, and both cholecalciferol baits. For long-term baiting, it's all, because it's a reflection on the problem with the site. So that all baits have it. When does our baiting regime start? For permanent baiting, it starts from day one. From day one, you've got no rodents and you're permanent baiting. For long-term baiting, it's after 35 days. So on day 36, our our long-term baiting starts. So we had rodents when we went at the beginning on day 1, and we've still got rodents on day 36. So that's a big difference between the two. Both can be indoors and outdoors, and both you've got to remove them if you see any evidence of our non-targets. Obviously, non-targets, I'm including mammals and birds. Obviously, they're obvious non-targets, but be mindful also of non-target rodents ingesting the bait. So that's a summary slide of the differences. So I hope that was all clear. So I will stop sharing. And thank you.
Thanks for that, Sharon. That was great. Really important subject, and for people to understand the difference, it's amazingly important. We've got a few questions that have come through. We've got 3 on there. Fabulous. So the first one is about cholecalciferol. It's just to clarify the understanding of how it can be used. So someone here says is it designed to not have to long-term bait, i.e. short-term fast baiting for maximum benefit, that type of thing?
Yeah.
It's just
yes. Yeah, that's it. I mean, definitely yes. But if you need to, it's there. But I mean, an example for me is I had a site that the rats took 15 weeks to go in a bait box. So just in the bait box. So nothing to do. So what happens is I had the bait down, and I removed it after a week because I thought, and I just watched, and 15 weeks in, so then you can put it in. But as I could do that, but as a pest control, you're not going to remove the bait, put it in, put it back, put it in. But yeah, that's the worst case of neophobia I've ever come across. So there are examples, but yeah, it's not designed. Do you know what I mean? The idea is that it wouldn't be necessary, but it's there in case. It's there on all baits, long-term baiting. Yeah.
Sure, at week 14 you were like, oh, these rats are really not going in, and it was that 15th week that you got to.
And you know what? It's like somebody pressed a button. It's like somebody pressed a button. 100 bait boxes, and then all of a sudden, within a week, 80% of them was activity.
Interesting.
It's as if, like, I don't know, the dominance, or somebody said, right, that's okay, and then they all started following.
Yeah.
Unbelievable behavior.
It really is. There is no one site that's the same. I mean, there can be, but yeah, I mean, that's really extreme. Good stuff. So got a question with regards to the things that the crew guidance says, the code of practice says, or what the label says. And in the beginning, you were talking about permanent baiting and being able to use it on sites where there's a high health risk to the site. And as we're just mentioning, they're a bit confused because they thought it was a high risk of reinvasion or potential for reinvasion. Is it the other? Or?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, that's what I mean. It's a site, say, where there's a risk of reinvasion, but it's a zero tolerance site. So like a hospital, it'd be a zero tolerance site. So if they've never had rodents, and I don't know, say if it's a hospital, they've never had rodents. Like, let's in this scenario, there's nothing near them. Rodents have never been there. Then there's no point permanent baiting because it's never happened. But it's like a high risk site that's had an infestation, and you don't want that happening again. So it's all based down. There had to have been an infestation in the first place. So it's a high risk of like a reinvasion or like a zero tolerance site for any reinvasion.
Fabulous. If you had this is just I'm trying to imagine what people are thinking now scenario wise. Let's say you've got an office block. That's just an office block, the car park. It's not an issue, but they do have quite a lot of activity from time to time. That high potential for reinvasion. Is permanent baiting somewhere that you could use for that as well, or is that still you're balancing it? It's really up to the technician.
That's it. It's up to the technician. I mean, is that really a high risk site, and you're better going in like blitzing it and then coming out? So so what is a high risk and of reinvasion, and what isn't? I'd say no for that one. No,
completely. And I think this is a big passion of mine is that we need to recognize ourselves as professionals, and that people are contracting us for our skills and our ability to assess and decide and make decisions, and this is just one of them. There's not always one answer for every site, and I think these are things that improve the industry and the view of technicians. It's like, look, you're skilled individuals, you're selling yourself, not that box in the corner. You decide what needs to happen.
That's it. And like I said, permanent baiting, it's your tool only. Professionals, don't mean it's something nobody else can offer, only trained professionals, and because it's recognized that you're the experts, you can go in and assess a site and assess the risk of reinvasion, like I say. Fabulous.
A very, very specific scenario-based question here, but we can see if you're happy to answer it. But someone's got some rat holes in a hedgerow next to a chicken coop. Is that permitted? They're experiencing a massive infestation on the farm, so they're using burrow baiting near to a chicken coop. Do you think that's something that's reasonable?
A chicken coop is a building, if you can say it's a building. Yeah, so yes.
Because that's the other thing we get. They're kind of like, what is a building? Does it have to be humans in there? Or?
So yes. So I mean, for me, I'd say a chicken coop was the building. The hedgerow, if it's near to the, I mean, if they're coming from the hedgerow and attacking the chicken coop, then yes. I mean, not for permanent baiting. I mean, definitely not. But I mean, something to be, you could treat it. Yes.
The label and environmental risk assessments and things like that. So would you say recording, like when you have to record an environmental risk assessment, that's always got to kind of happen, isn't it, really?
Yes. Everything, document everything, absolutely document everything. And especially, like I say, when you're doing these long-term and permanent baiting, things that are if you like, when rodenticides were first developed, that they weren't foreseen that things would go on for 35 days, that you'd actually be using them when you haven't got an infestation. So when you're using them in these kind of extraordinary, if I like to say, then even more so, you need to be documenting the why and the how. And really kind of go to town on this. So if you're ever challenged, that you're not just putting bait down and walking away and coming back 8 weeks later and anything could have happened to it. I mean, well, you've got take when did you get take? Day 1, day 6? Do you know what I mean? So you have to record why your visits are, why you did it. But I think even more so in these two, because they are, if you like, unusual in inverted commas use. Do you know what I mean? What wasn't the first designed for beyond 35 days and permanent baiting wasn't originally kind of what we thought we'd have to do.
No, absolutely. It's those wordings, isn't it? People get confused with. Permanent baiting indoors. So revisit frequency is noted as pest controller's choice. However, does the label trumps this? Surely does it? Like deadline, there's a paste out there. I think maybe it specifies visit frequency. So if you have a label that says you've got to visit this in these frequencies, that would trump what a pest controller decides to do.
Yeah, so normally the visiting frequencies are for baiting, and then for permanent baiting, the visiting frequencies are normally different.
Just to confuse it more.
Yeah. But I mean, if on a label, I haven't looked at all. If on a label it says for permanent baiting, I'll like still visit every other day or every 3 to 4 days, then yes. But most visiting frequencies are for your baiting regime, not for your permanent. Your baiting and your long-term baiting, they're the same, but for permanent baiting, it's normally a different baiting regime.
Yeah, because it's different circumstances, I guess.
Different circumstances.
You've got infestation, you've got permanent baiting, and then long-term baiting. You always see it as even though long-term is infestation, but it's past the initial.
Kind of
see it in three sections. Good. Okay, got a fair few more questions coming in, and we're on time, but I'm going to choose one more. So anybody that it's not because I'm favouring a question, but I'm trying to get one that maybe we haven't discussed or you didn't talk about in the presentation. And maybe Sharon, when we are done, if you can go in and maybe type some answers to some of these. Is that okay? Yeah. Fabulous. Okay, some pricing stuff, we won't do that. Hi Sharon, you used the term ITM. Can you explain this, please, or did she miss? I think you meant IPM. I think you meant IPM, not ITM. I think it was just a pronunciation thing. That's right, isn't it?
I probably said IPM.
Integrated pest management. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah.
It's Paul that asked that question. It was integrated pest management. I do that. It's getting my T's and P's all mixed up. Would you listen? I better leave it there because we are 1 minute over. There's another 4 open in the chat.
Okay.
So when you do pop off, you can type some of the answers. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Really important subject, like I said. And thanks so much, Sharon. Appreciate it.
Okay then. Cheers.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.